Eleni. I initially trained in Greece as a doctor and came to London to do cancer research, to be an oncologist. And that's in London I met palliative medicine. And because I've always been interested in holistic care, I decided to move to palliative care because it offered me an opportunity to look after the mind, body, and soul of people who who I was a doctor for. So now I'm a consultant in palliative care in a hospice in Surrey, walking hospice, and I also work at Ashford and St Peter's Hospital in the palliative care department. I managed to get a grant, 25,000 grant from an organization called Emergence Foundation to develop this project. There is a feeling at the word that we are in a battle at the moment. Not the battle with COVID that we all hear about every day, although it was brought to the front because of COVID. I feel it's a battle about values. What do we value? This is a question we ask our patients at the end of life. Do we value health, wealth, family, power, status, freedom, community, autonomy, compassion, kindness, humility, honesty, selflessness? And it's about principles, principles of harmony. I'll talk about this more later. It's actually a battle between living and dying, literally. And the fact is that we are all dying. However, in the meantime, we were given the gift of life. So the question is how to live and prepare for dying. In fact, the most important question is to be or not to be. It is in the being that lies the answer, not in the doing. And one of the greatest calls to being, rather than doing, comes when we are at the bedside of someone who is dying. It's the quality of being that can make all the difference to them. Everyone wants to die well. It has been argued that depriving people of the opportunity to die well is the final form of social injustice. So the question is how to prepare for that. Tonight I'm going to try to show, after I finish my written introduction, how this can be approached through a new yet very, very old concept, the concept of harmony. To do that with harmony in living and dying approach, which we call HILDA, we used words, stories, singing, movement, silence, geometry, music, and questions. What I ask from you tonight is to listen with an open heart and mind. This is actually a very big ask, but one that I'm confident that you will be able to respond to because of your intelligence. It requires a mentally and emotionally intelligent person who already understands, and I'm using the word understands, not know on purpose, a person who understands quite a lot to listen without prejudgment to a new approach. And here I'm talking about real human intelligence, not artificial intelligence. The Harmony Living and Dying approach started 2 years ago following a grant that Chris and I applied for at the Emergence Foundation. This is a grant giving organization that gives grants. I think they're finished now, they're not giving any more, to organizations who want to improve what happens in communities and who have spiritual purposes as well. Uh, my project was supported by the College of Medicine and Integrated Health, by Walking and Sambia Hospice, and by the Harmony Project. I'm going, as I said, um, to introduce harmony through words and stories. And I'm going to tell you how it started, which was with my friend here on the left, Jane. We were working together at Kingston Hospital, and she's a retired palliative care nurse. And we wanted to find a way to to make people talk about death and dying. Because we know, and the research shows it, that people avoid the subject. It's something that many people are afraid of and find it uncomfortable and avoid it. And as Lynn said, that can create a lot of problems because people come to it unprepared. So we've tried a number of things. We went to various death cafes. We've done workshops on conscious living and conscious dying. And on the way, we met other people who helped us. We met Bridget here, who is also a nurse, retired also now, and was working in the States and developed her own end of life care project. And we met Anne in the middle, Anne Gibbon, who is a solicitor, in one of the death cafes we went to. And she was passionate about end of life care. She wanted to help people. And she introduced us actually to the Emergence Foundation. She also introduced us to the lady on the right, Suzanne Green. She actually is a businesswoman, an entrepreneur who has nurseries, children's nurseries, and has set up this group called the Inspired Women. So she asked me to come and give a talk to a group of inspired women. And then from that, many ladies expressed interest to find out more about death and dying, and we held a number of um, dinners where we got together and we exchanged ideas. Through that, it became apparent that people want to talk, and when we introduced the concept of harmony, it was easier to approach end of life care. Further back, the idea of harmony came from a number of people in my life. The man on the right is Professor Spiros Marketos, who was health minister in Greece and professor of history and philosophy of medicine at the University of Athens. And I did a diploma in history and philosophy of medicine with him. And he introduced me to Hippocrates on the left. And it's through Hippocrates that I was introduced to ancient wisdom and ancient science, and through that to harmony. When Professor Marketos, my mentor, was dying, he had a difficulty with thrombosis, and we are not sure exactly. He refused to go to hospital. He refused to be seen by any doctor, really. And he died peacefully overnight in his bed, which was wonderful. The man in the center is my father, who is the reason I suppose I'm interested in holistic care, holistic medicine. My father was diagnosed with autoimmune condition in his 40s, in the 1980s, and he was told to have a number of procedures and to return back to hospital, and he was told he had a 5-year prognosis. This was a man who had 6 children, and he was the only breadwinner in the family. He was determined not to die, and he was determined not to go back to doctors and to try a number of holistic approaches to help himself, which kept him going for 20 years. He only went back to hospital after his initial diagnosis only once, 1 month before he died. He was on oxygen for continuous oxygen. I think he had sarcoidosis, although it wasn't acknowledged at the time. The diagnosis was COPD, but he was never a smoker. But he was on continuous oxygen for at least a year, and he was severely disabled for a number of years. Despite that, he wanted to live. In his greatest suffering, he never said, I want to die. Never, not once. He was enjoying life, and he wanted to see his children grow, and he managed to help a lot of people who were coming to see him at his home. He died at home, suddenly, holding my mom's hand, and the last word he said was her name. And when he died at his funeral, this is in a small town in northern Greece, we had a wake. Lots of people were around his body overnight. We didn't leave him alone. Men carried his coffin to the church, and there were hundreds of people who came to say goodbye to him. This was a man who was just a civil servant, who was disabled for many years, but was able to help others, his community. So his life and death, I think, inspired me in many ways. Going back to Hippocrates, it was Hippocrates who said that health is harmony of man's elemental component. That in itself, this phrase it could take us hours to try and explain it. Hippocrates writes aphoristically in his books, and you can buy his books. There are 8 volumes, and they are translated. So he writes aphoristically, and it's difficult to decipher some of his sayings. I was able actually to understand what he was talking about because I was interested a lot on his advice regarding nutrition only when I studied Ayurveda, which is the ancient Indian medicine. He also says about death and dying, of all things, nothing dies, and nothing comes into being that did not exist before. Things change merely by mingling and being separated. But all things, both human and divine, are in a state of flux, upwards and downwards by exchanges. Now, there's a lot of talk about Hippocrates these days. People keep repeating his saying, first, do no harm. Th- there are misunderstandings about Hippocrates. People say that he was the first scientist, that he was the first to separate religion from medicine. But that actually is not true. There's a lot of mentions of the gods in his books, and there's a lot about the mystery and the question of life and death in his books. So he didn't separate the spirit from the body. He looked at them together, which is how we should practice in our everyday life. Before him, Pythagoras also mentioned harmony. He said health depends on the harmony of the constituting principles of the human body, and disease was caused by the lack of this harmony. Pythagoras also talks about what happens to us after we die. He was one of the first in the Greek, amongst the Greek philosophers, to talk about metempsychosis, which is the fact that the soul moves from one body to another. It's a question, really, what happens after we die. And even before Pythagoras and Hippocrates, the Greeks tried to give meaning to what happens in their everyday lives through mythology. And they had the gods. And Harmony was a goddess. She was the daughter of Aphrodite, who, as we know, is the goddess of love and beauty, and Ares, the god of war. This is very interesting. In this junction of these two very opposite gods, they gave us an idea of what harmony might be about. Harmony is about joining, combining contrasted elements, life and death, war and peace, day and night. You can think of many examples. So in ancient Greek, harmony means to join, to combine different contrasted elements. And what it means is that everything is connected with everything else. And when we live in harmony, we can enjoy a happy and healthy life. So all these ideas inspired me to look into harmony in more detail and see whether this can be used in our everyday life. And with Hilda, we wanted to explore the oneness of the miracle of life and the mystery of death. And we thought the harmony is a more positive way of looking at things. Also, we live in a very secular society. Most people are not religious, and they can't find a meaning in difficulties, in suffering, in death. They don't understand it. And perhaps through harmony, we can open ourselves to something which is above us, that we can't really explain with words, with the psychoanalytic process. And we can then feel, instead of being able to express it with words, feel some kind of peace and less fear. But this is a practical approach. We wanted to make it practical. And we wanted to draw not just on modern science, but also on all these ancient wisdom traditions that have so much to give us. Because language is very important. In one word, we can convey all sorts of meanings. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. Sophia in Greek is wisdom. And in ancient Greece, the word Sophia meant someone, Sophos, wise, was someone who was able to do something practical really well. Wise person wasn't one who was able to say words in a nice way, or write in a nice way, or develop ideas. Not just that, much more than that. A wise person was someone who could build a table well, or make a nice meal, or do embroidery well, or do calligraphy, or draw, or make a statue really well, or architect. These people were wise. So this is the way in harmony in living and dying, and in harmony in health, that we look at wisdom and the practical approach we use. I want to say that none of these could ever happen without our sister organization, with a number of my colleagues who are from different disciplines, from the world of complementary medicine and healthcare, from the world of dance and movement, from theater, from neurology, from the academic world. We built a team together and we set up a community interest company called Harmony in Health. And we've done a number of projects. We have a 10-week online project on long COVID. And our next project is focusing on student wellness. And we're having our first event on the 23rd of February, which is an online workshop with Fitzwilliam College, but we have it open to all students. And I would be very grateful if any of you have a way to promoting it to your students or to your friends. Join us. The website is harmonyinhealth.org. We want to find like-minded people who want to look at health in a wider way. Health and medicine are not exactly the same. So we look at health as harmony, and we look at mind, body and spirit and emotions. And we look at ancient traditions and modern science. So harmony, and what are principles of harmony? That we haven't got the principles of harmony. In a way, there are many principles of harmony. They are universal laws, really, that have an effect on what happens to us and what happens to the earth and what happens to the cosmos. But on our level, we want to concentrate on 7 principles of harmony and to look at living and dying through them. The first principle is health, and we talked in Hilda about healthy dying. Second is interdependence, interconnectedness. Everything is connected, everything. In the natural world, within ourselves, and on a cellular level as well, and on a planetary level. And interdependent, everything is interdependent. If You change one thing, everything changes. There's diversity, which is key. We are all different and we don't see the same thing. We all have different approaches and we have different needs. So, in acknowledging that in a respectful way towards each other, we we may perhaps don't understand others, but we accept them and we try to get into their shoes and do things and be with them the way they need through their eyes. The principle of cycles. We understand it really on a daily basis. We have the cycle of the hour, the cycle of night and day, the cycle of seasons. And this has been a useful way sometimes for me to approach patients who didn't really want to talk about dying, but were prepared to talk about the fact that in the natural world there comes an autumn and then a winter and things die. Everything. If you stand out in a field or on top of a hill and you look around, everything is dying and everything is regenerated. And that can give hope and can open up a question. If it is this way for the natural world, we are nature. It happens with us as well. And on a cellular level inside us, the cells change all the time. One cell becomes 2, 4, 8, and then it disappears, but it has given birth to something else. And all the cells inside us die and reborn every day. The principle of adaptation, because everything changes, nothing stays the same. Heraclitus said you can never step in the same river twice. We need to adapt, and we do adapt to the change in circumstances. And that has to do with the end of life care as well. People go through a lot of losses, one loss after another, as they grow older, as they grow more ill, and they adapt until one day they can't adapt anymore. Now, the principle of geometry and beauty is a strange one, but actually is key. In a way, we live heaven and hell on this earth. We can choose to see beauty in everything around us, which can help us. Our patients in the hospice, in walk-in hospice, love it because when they come to the hospice, they can have the door open. Unlike the hospitals, you can't have a door or a window open. They have rooms on their own. We can open the door and there's trees outside and they can listen to the wind going through the leaves of the trees and they can listen to the birds. And that in itself is beauty coming in and helping them, soothing them through their difficult journey. And at home, a flower can be a great help, a photograph. But geometry is even more than that. If you look in nature, there's so many patterns and there's so much geometry, but it's also in us. I don't have the time to go into details, but we have all different geometrical patterns on us and inside us. And the key principle is the principle of oneness, what the Dalai Lama says, that we are all one, and until we're able to feel with other people as they are not separate from us, but they are one, then we can't feel peace really. And if we feel that way, that we are not separate from other people, that we are one, then we are going to help them. We are going to care for them in the right way. There's also, this applies to the earth. We're one with Mother Earth and we're one with the cosmos. But these are big ideas that need exploring. Really fast, I'm going to say that we had a number of online workshops. We were planning to do face-to-face workshops, but then the pandemic happened and we had to delay the project for a year and then decided to move our workshops online. This in a way allowed us to reach people far and wide. We had people from all over Europe, from North Africa, from South and North America, from India, and people expressed interest and got in contact from Australia as well. We had around 600 people register for 5 online workshops. Around 400 of them attended, and then I managed, after the restrictions were lifted last summer, to have face-to-face workshops at the hospice, 6 of them with a group of bereaved relatives, which was very interesting and lovely to do to be face to face with people. Our first event was on cycles in nature and geometry, and geometry, as Leonardo da Vinci said, is uh, the only certainty in life. And geometry means measure of earth and has to do with the fact that we are all going to occupy certain measure of earth at the end, which is a very small measure. And during that workshop, we drew together this beautiful pattern, which is the flower of life. And what else did we do? We had a lot of breakout rooms, and we tried a mindfulness exercise, and we lit a candle at the end where we remembered people close to our heart who had passed away. Our next workshop was on oneness and love, and again we posed the question, what does oneness and love mean for us, and what it means to live fully and die gracefully. And we tried to look at that through a short meditation. I had a small presentation, and then we had the theme of storytelling, telling the bees. There was this old tradition that when someone died in England, they would go and tell the bees, and there's a whole story around that that helps people approach death and dying through stories. And then we had a neuroscientist and dancer who did dance and movement practice so that people felt a sense of peace and connection with their heart and with their body. We weren't just about words, we were about doing something embodied while we were talking about death. And then we had breakout discussion groups. And just to say that in Harmony in Health and in Harmony in Living, we are very interested in movement and natural exercises. And Hippocrates writes about them, saying that, and he says, he divides exercises to natural and unnatural. Natural exercises, this is very interesting. It's not just physical activity like walking, and he considers walking the ultimate natural exercise. It's also talking, speech giving, reading, or singing. This is an exercise, he says, that moves and warms the soul. Thinking is another natural exercise. Hearing, listening carefully is an exercise. and looking at something beautiful like a painting or a art and or nature, a beautiful um, lake, that in itself creates a movement inside that warms the soul. And this is where we're coming from in terms of ancient wisdom. Our next workshop was on beauty and nature, inner and outer. And again, we did a meditation and we had a live cooking session um, by a friend of mine who is a nutrition scientist. We did a master's together in nutritional medicine. And I, I think that's very important in end of life care and for people who are ill and for the carers to know what food to give, how to prepare it, and how to serve it, how to nourish someone, and what people need when they're ill is completely different to what they need when they are healthy and young. I did a lot of work on that in the hospice. We're doing cooking on prescription classes. Sick people do not benefit from the same diet as healthy people, and we don't learn enough about it. This is one of my missions. If I manage to bring the importance of cooking more to the forefront of healthcare professionals and teach people how to cook the right food, and to teach carers what to cook is quite important. Cooking is like making music. So how we live and how we die is another project that we did. And we talked about the science. Some genes seem to become more active for a couple of days after the organism dies. This is an effect that is referred to as the twilight of death. And it makes you think why some religious traditions have these rituals of getting together and reading from the sacred texts 1 day and 3 days afterwards, and then 40 days. And with Paul, we did a healthy living and healthy dying workshop where he told the story of his wife, and we listened to music that was prepared for this event. So, no man is an island. I'm finishing just to say that we had a number of feedbacks from people who attended the workshop. I want to read one of them. I had never seen anyone die before my husband, and the pathway from life to death I found hard to cope with. But I'm now understanding it so much better because of Hilda. Thank you so much for running these workshops. Hilda and Harmony in Health are definitely assisting me in my journey. What I think I'll learn from all of this is that what you're doing with Harmony is to effectively, quietly revolutionize coping with some of life's challenges using a multidisciplinary approach and learning from each other with innovative ideas incorporated from a variety of disciplines. There's an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So, does this approach speak to you? If it does, connect with us, write to me. Have a look at our website, harmonyinlivinganddying.org, and connect with us on social media.
I think what was coming through for me in your talk was about living to the full. And that for me is so important, that we everybody, somebody said everybody wants to die well. Well, probably true, but I think everybody wants to live well. What I was getting from you was that feeling of power given through harmony. It was really, really exciting, and it's hard to say something pithy because there were so many layers in.
Linda, you got a thumbs up from Martin there, who can't speak at the moment, but I know.
Thank you, Martin.
Laura.
This is the most countries represented in a meeting. Thank you, Eleni. That was fantastic. The conversation on the side and the chat has been a lot about training or lack thereof in many countries about end of life. And I think this group can do a lot to share resources around that over the coming months. My quick comment about harmony is the word diversity was in there and interconnectedness in your description. And it occurs to me, and even the kind of combination of factors that seem to be opposing. What I don't see is conflict or avoidance of conflict. And I think that's such an important part of it, because the complexity of the human experience means that when you're avoiding conflict, you're actually not getting into those deep issues. So that kind of came up for me in really getting down into the depth of diversity and interconnectedness. So thank you for prompting that.
Well, also linking your Laura and Martin and Linda's point is that I think quite a lot of people, I think I saw this, only actually ask the question, what does living well mean when they're about to die? And suddenly realize they got an awful lot wrong. I think the dying place is one of the best places to learn how to live well.
I just wanted to say something about this issue of doctors. I mean, I'm a doctor, but I hate going to hospitals, having tests, having procedures. And I think it was you, Laura, you mentioned Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. And the thing I remember most about that, his description of one medical specialist in older people's health. And he said he watched him in action. He didn't look at the results of blood tests or investigations. He looked at the feet of the older person, because he knew in terms of the quality of their life, the state of their feet was going to be the most important thing about your point, Linda, how they lived well at the end, as opposed to dying well. He didn't worry about whether their blood sodium was high or low. He just wanted them to be able to walk about.
Rumbi.
Just two comments. The first one was, it's just an observation that everybody seems to want to avoid doctors in hospitals. And I think you said it in your presentation 3 times minimum. So I was like, that's an interesting reflection point. But in terms of what does that actually mean? You know, I think there's a lot to learn about that. And I have had patients who beg not to see doctors or to go to a hospital. So it's very interesting. We never really quite unpick that, but that's quite deep for me, especially at the beginning of my GP career. But what I was going to say was, I think spirituality is very important. So when I think harmony, I think yin yang, if I was to visualize it. But the reason why I'm talking about spirituality or lack of, whether it's atheist, what is your belief? So in Africa, for example, death is just, it's a cycle. So it's just another, you know how maybe you're born, you get married, you die. And for us, death is not an end, it's a transition. And then there's other things, I think you mentioned about first day, third day, or whatever. And there's stuff you do, and then a year later you do, and then you enter like the family or the ancestors and all sorts of things. So the way I would try and explain it is it's like Avatar, you know, the movie Avatar, very similar to that, where it's almost like the question is, do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe in, what is your core belief? And I think that really informs death and how you view death and how you process death. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and you definitely need to come back, Rumbi, because that's such an important thing to unpack there. David, Colin Tomey, I just wonder if or you or somebody else could come in to make some thought about this. Why do people want to avoid doctors? who are supposed to be the people you go to, or what you'll be doing about generalism and the role of primary care. And Linda, let's hear
Yes,
you.
I immediately, my first response when you said that, Ramia, it was really great that you made that observation. I personally feel, and it was only when you said it that it occurred to me, that perhaps it is about the fear of losing control. And therefore, in a way, the doctor is perceived as a person that will do unto you rather than with you. And I suppose that might be one of the reasons that people want to avoid hospitals and so on, because they suddenly feel they're going to be in, they're just going to have things done to them. And I think maybe that's the, for me, I think one of the things that's so important is that the medical professional or person who's working with somebody who is at the end of life is actually making sure that that person is in control as long as they possibly can be, if that makes sense.
Thousands of unfinished threads and 1 minute left. David, I have to hear from you to pick up that.
Well, I think it's to do with the relationship that somebody will have with their doctor, and often it's very impersonal and technical. So that's the issue. It's a relationship issue. And also the fact that there's a spiritual, Rumbi mentioned spirituality, and it's often equated with religion, but spirituality is about relationships and humanity and love. And if a doctor's achieved that in the time even before the dying period, then they're much more likely to have them as a partner in that caring experience.
These have to be developed, but we're pretty much out of time. Perhaps doctors need to learn about health just as religious people need to learn about spirituality. And I'll leave that little thought on the table to be picked up on future occasions. Any last desperate point from anybody? There's so many people here I want to hear more from, but we have other occasions. Laura.
I think.
Oh, hold on, Craig, sorry.
Yeah,
Craig, quickly. But you'll have to unmute, or we'll cut you off.
All of this talk about people avoiding doctors. Something, Lynn Jenkins, you said at the outset, which surprised me. You were saying, "Oh, thank goodness we steered it away from doctors." What did you mean? And does it relate to this idea of people not wishing to see doctors?
That's a March answer. You've got 2 months to work the answer to that, Lynn. What I will say is that whilst we're just a bunch of ordinary people who are doing things, we seem to have quite big reach. I mean, even today. And it's funny how the ideas that crop up coin start appearing in other places afterwards. I don't know why this happens, but there you go. I want to thank you all very, very much. Actually, Laura, let me throw it over to you to close down. I've been talking far too much.
Oh, I don't know if I can. You still want pithy and summary. And, I just want to thank everybody who's come, whether you're regular or we haven't seen you in a while, or you're a new face or an old face. I'm just thrilled that everybody came. I think it's a really fruitful conversation, whether we're chatting, talking, or seeing each other, or just seeing the smiles. I think that's spreading some of the goodwill and the effort that we're all trying to make in our own communities. Eleni, thank you for helping us get there. And I look forward to the conversation blooming from here on out. So thank you much to everybody, and especially to Eleni for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
We've only just begun, and there's a lot more people in the network. See you next month.